Then you're good. My academic career has really literally been a crazy pathway. Everything from looking at intentional drug use to pathogens to surfing reefs. I built the first surfing reef up at Gold Coast in 83. Wow. So anyway, I was also in movies for a while. I didn't go so well, so I decided to try some other things. And so I also thought it was important to tell you about my timeline. So I'm an old bugger in my 60s, and when I was sort of in my informative years, they were sort of back in the early 70s, listening to the Beatles and all that kind of stuff. And computers were just starting to come around, and the big mainframe computers with the card decks. That was how I grew up at university. But when I graduated and started getting out and working as an engineer, I'm an engineer by training, civil engineer, and I trained to become a water-based engineer, a coastal engineer. I was really keen on using computers. People weren't using computers, and then around 1977, this little beauty came out, which was the Apple computer. I've been using Apple since 1977. That's 40 years. And I've actually just chucked it this year because it's a piece of crap, the new stuff, and so I'm going back to the Windows-based system. But that's another story. Anyway, this thing had all the computing power of the chip in your bank card that you have right now. So that's kind of what you're going to see is some of this really old stuff. In fact, I couldn't even find some of the printouts and some of the graphics and stuff we had. But I kind of grew up in this era as an early researcher in the sort of 70s and early 80s, and so a couple of the startups that I'll talk about were really developed during that sort of period of time, and then there's another one. So I'm going to go through 3 attempts I had at startups, and the first one I was going to be the software guru. So this was sort of 1978. PCs have just come out. I've just got out of a master's degree. I was working as an engineer. I was doing some really cool water modeling. So this is some graphics from the day. It's actually pretty good quality graphics from those days. The color screens were just being invented, and they were, I don't know, maybe 240 by 120 DPI. And you couldn't print this stuff at the time. There were no color printers. But I was doing a lot of modeling, so I was trying to look at hydrodynamics and how does water move through watersheds. And then I had this great idea. I thought, look, we could put all these sensors around, and these sensors could go up to probably Sputnik at that time, right? One of the first satellites. And you could use that satellite information and you could pop it down there to a modeling platform. So we were doing this modeling, but you didn't have a good way of calibrating a model. You had to go out and you had to measure all this stuff in the field. And so you'd go out on one day and you'd measure it, and then you'd have one day's worth of data. So I thought, well, if we could put all this stuff out in the field, deploy it remotely and have it communicate somehow, then you'd have all kinds of money. And so I had a great idea, and so, believe it or not, entrepreneurs networks were around in 1977. In fact, I put here, this is the root of entrepreneur, which is entreprendre in French, which was first used in like 1830 to describe the director of an orchestra. So that's where entrepreneurship comes from. And this is an interesting little graph. This is the usage based on text recognition, the digitized text, on how many times people use the word entrepreneur. And you can see it's become really popular. It was popular in the 50s, it's become really popular again now. But anyway, so there was this entrepreneurs network, and it was actually associated with the Rotary Club. And so I was given a mentor. I was a young guy, I was in my 20s, I had this great idea. I was given a mentor. And the mentor was the local funeral parlor owner, because he'd had a very successful business. This guy had like a Ferrari, a Cadillac, the big cars of the day. And so he was seen as very, very entrepreneurial. And my business, like his, ended up dead. So, because the mentorship wasn't really good, and I didn't have enough cash, I managed to raise, I think it was $10,000 or $15,000, which is probably like $100,000 these days. And really there was no marketing, there was nobody to teach you how to really get your business out and going. So that didn't work very well. I'll spend more time on the one that actually worked. Number 2 was pressure transducers. So this is when is this? This is 1980. This is a lab at the University of New South Wales in Manlyvale called the Water Research Lab, which is still there. So I came to do a PhD in Sydney, and I took these things called pressure transducers, which were really just developed in the aviation industry at that time. And I had to make them all waterproof and stuff like that. And I thought, well, I could throw these inside a structure and I could measure the pressure inside the structure. The structures are like rubble mount breakwaters. And I had to waterproof all these boxes, and I ran some waves of that. And there was a really great correlation between what you measured in pressure and the actual sort of wave heights in front of the structure and the energy propagating through the structure, which was really cool. And in fact, pressure and the relationship to waves goes back to like 1847. There was a guy named Airy. Has anybody heard of Airy? A-I-R-Y, British mathematician, Cambridge graduate, kind of like an entrepreneur in his day. Nobody's ever heard of Airy? No, there's no scientists or engineers or, no? Okay, well, my joke's lost on that, so I won't bother with that one. Anyway, I took these pressure transducers, I'd used them in my PhD, and I thought, wow, shit, this is a really good correlation. I think I can actually measure pressure out in the ocean, and Airy says you can convert that to wave height, so why don't I develop a device that can do that? So this is my attempt at the device. I want to go back one. That's my attempt. That was bootstrapped together with, again, probably about $50,000 in the day. Contributions from friends and not from family. They didn't have any money. And anyway, it ended up looking like this. And now this is a multi-billion-dollar business across the world. Now, unfortunately, between here and here, I wasn't involved. This was done by other people who sort of picked up on the same idea around pressure transducers and the ability to measure flow in rivers and waves in the coastal zone. So there's now about two global companies that do about $1 billion a year each, because this is a big part of environmental modeling. And so the issue around this one was always the cash and also the help. I was in Australia at this time, so entrepreneurship wasn't big in the 80s in Australia, that's for sure. Meat pies were big. Holden was big, V8s, yeah, but certainly not that. So, number 3, and this just clicked on by itself. You get this on like a timer, or do I have it on a timer? Anyway, number 3, and I just put here sweet as, because if you're from New Zealand, sweet as is a pretty good saying, and number 3 was really sweet as. So I started getting involved in looking at bacteria in water, again, back in the 1980s, because I was really interested in humanitarian development, humanitarian engineering. So I started to work in Africa and India, and my students and myself, we worked in urban slums. So we were looking at places that didn't have any type of infrastructure. There was no chance of getting clean water. And we wanted to see what we could do to really change that situation. And you can't do the colonial thing of putting in a central standpipe because of a number of issues. And I'll talk about that a little later on if we have enough time. But what really drove this home for me is I woke up one morning, this was May the 26th, the year was 2000, this was in Canada. And what happened in Canada was there was a water treatment facility in a small town of 5,000 people, run by a couple of brothers who worked for the Public Works Department. And they decided they didn't like the taste of chlorine in water, and so they turned the chlorinator off. And then over a long weekend in Canada, just in the spring when there's lots of snow melting and there's runoff, this area had a lot of cattle around it, and so because they turned off the chlorinator, they were filtering the water and treating it, but it doesn't kill the bacteria. And so this nasty particular type of bacteria called E.coli 157H7, it's the only type of E. coli. There's 1,000 strains of E. coli. They make us ill or sick, but they don't kill us. But this particular one was really bad, and this is associated with cattle, this particular bacteria. And so you may have heard, I don't know, in none of you are old enough, but in the 80s there were a number of kids died in the US from going to a Jack in the Box restaurant because they didn't cook the hamburger patties, the ground meat or whatever. They didn't cook it enough. And it had this H157, and it particularly affects young and old. And so what happened in this town, there were 7 deaths and a number of people hospitalized, and they were children and elderly. And so this, you wake up and you say, that can't happen in a place like Canada, surely? I mean, we don't even have this issue in the work we were doing in Africa and India, but this was a very serious problem. And so what do you do with this? You actually look at this and say, well, you got to do something. And so the next day after this news was released, I created a group of people at the university where I was working. And we said, we need to do this thing called the Rapid Online Automated Intelligence System. Part of the problem with Walkerton was they take water samples 10 times a day, But on a long weekend, these guys that ran the lab also didn't ship them out to be tested. And even when you do the test, an E. coli test takes 24 hours. An H157 test takes 5 days. So even if they would have put the water samples through the system, it would have been 5 days before somebody said, oops, you got H157. And we thought there's got to be a way you can automate this test, which has been around for 50 years. It's inoculating a plate with a media on it, and then you put it under a certain temperature, and then you count the colonies as they grow, and you can't actually measure the colonies of bacteria until they actually grow big enough to see them by the human eye. So we thought there's got to be a different way of doing this. And so I got together with a physicist and a chemist and a biologist and myself as the engineer to design what we thought would be this rapid automated system. And we actually sat around a room. And within 3 hours, we came up with this idea. We thought this would be really cool if we could do this. And what was new at the time was fiber optics. So fiber optics is just pushing photons down through a clear tube, and you can use it for all kinds of things. But it was pretty new at the time. And then we used a little bit of polymer science. The polymer was put at the end of the fiber optic tip, and that was to actually attract these little things that have got G's on them. The G is the substrate that you put the bacteria in. It's called glucuronidase. And what happens with the bacteria when they attach to the glucuronidase, if it is a bacteria, it sort of snaps off and creates a fluorescent particle. So it just fluoresces. And so that's all the little yellow things. So you got bacteria down here, you put in the glucuronidase, and you get these little fluorescent particles. And the feeling was if we could actually develop a polymer that actually attracted the fluorescent particles, you would actually help to magnify the process. And the reason to use the fiber optics is because that's 10 million times better than a human eye at picking up things. So instead of actually waiting for bacteria to grow in colonies, you could actually start picking individual bacteria that were growing. And that was really the basis of the system that we wanted to do. And part of it was then also to look at the electronics itself and how can we design that. And so we sort of sketched this up in 3 hours, and we thought, well, we'll give it a go and give it a try. Well, the first thing you got to do is get some money, so we went and got some money. I'll just throw a couple of slides. This was the benchtop system. It took about 2 years to develop all the different pieces, the substrate, the polymer, the fiber optics, the miniaturization of the fiber optics, and to ensure that it worked. And we had to do lots and lots of testing. So that's the lab scale. And of course, a lab scale, a lab bench thing, you can never sell that. People don't want to buy a bunch of shit that sits on a bench. So we went and got an industrial designer to work with us. And the industrial designer, helped us look at how you miniaturize things, how you package things. Kind of looked like the coffee makers of the days. Anybody got one of those old coffee makers, with the jug you put in there? Yeah. We still have them at the uni all the time, but that's because we're still in the 90s. But anyway, so this was the sketch, and then this was the prototype. So we made some prototypes of this. This was after miniaturizing all this stuff here, which was the sort of the brains and the fiber optics, the sort of the chemical solutions, the control systems, and that was all miniaturized. To develop this thing. So when we had this, we all of a sudden had a product, and we went out and started selling the product. We weren't sure what kind of business model we had. We had lots of good mentoring on this one. And we ended up with a system where this unit was actually about $10,000 to build, and our initial proposal was we wouldn't sell the unit, but what we would sell was every time you did a test, just like you did in the regular lab. So every time you went and did a plate test, it cost you $10. It cost you $10 to buy the media kit and to have the technician look at it after a day. And so we thought, okay, well, if we can do this for less than $10 a test, we're going to be pretty good. And so what we did is we said, we're not going to sell the device, we're going to sell the little media kits. So we're going to sell the glucuronidase and the trimethylumbatherone or whatever it was. I don't remember the exact chemical now. And that was really cool because there's little modules you put in for each test. You stuck up in this device, and it cost us about, 2 cents, 3 cents to manufacture. But we could sell it for $10 because that was the going price of the test. So the model was give the device for free, but you got to pay for the consumables, and with a very high profit markup. And so we had that going for a little bit, and then this is what it looks like now. It's the same device. It's much more streamlined, and this happened after a lot more knock-on investment and venture capital funding. And so the company's doesn't exist anymore because it was bought. So I was just going to kind of solve, why did this work and the others didn't? First of all, there was a problem that was actually there. And we have tons of ideas for which there isn't a problem. And that's one of the biggest mistakes I think people make in the startup space, is you got a great idea, but nobody cares. And so nobody really cared at the time about this numerical modeling I was doing, because it was too expensive to fire stuff to satellites. Nobody cared about the pressure transducers because they didn't want to invest. But we had this problem. We had the deaths that occurred in Canada, and that rippled across the world. So every jurisdiction that produced water for people in developed countries was saying, holy crap, this could happen where we are. So it was a really captive market. We also had a dream team. So we handpicked, the best physicists that worked on photonics at the time at the university I was at. We went and got the microbiologists that worked for the Ministry of Health doing water standards. And we went and worked with a really good polymer science. And so we put this team together, and that's why we were able to sort of dream up this concept in a very short period of time. And it worked in the end, because there was a lot of hard work going into it. But what really helped, of course, is then we took 4 really smart people and we wrote a really good proposal for research funding. At the time, in the early 2000s, the Ontario government, where I lived in Canada, was very much pushing an innovation agenda. And they had a number of large calls for proposals, and we partnered with a number of water providers, like Hunter Water, all across Ontario. We partnered with the consulting industry who could use this. We partnered with a lot of groups, and then we went to the government. The government gave us $6 million. So $6 million means you can do a lot of stuff really well. So we spent $6 million in 2 years, a lot of hard work going on in the polymer science and the photonics and in the bacterial space and in the automation, the actual mechanization of the system, the miniaturization of all the photonics was incredibly difficult to do, but it was done. And then, luckily, we had an angel, and the angel was really good. Has anybody ever seen that on a credit card or seen it on a bank or a machine? In Canada, it's all over the place. It was actually a system started by a Canadian who was at MIT. And so this guy, Brad Ross, was a 30-year-old when we met him. We were all older than 30. But he was a 30-year-old, and he'd started up this company called Interact, which was the first really secure electronic mechanism for withdrawing money. Because this is before that time. I mean, you guys, you're all so young. You couldn't actually go and stick a card in a wall and get money out, but you could all of a sudden when Interact came along. And so Brad started this company, and him and a couple of guys from MIT, they were from MIT, they were Canadians, but they went to MIT to do master's degrees in business. They were all engineers. And they sold their company for $400 million in 1998, which was a lot of money. And so this guy retired back to his hometown in Canada, which was where my university was, and he was looking, what do I do next? Like, where do I play with my money? And so he was actually really good. He invested I think it was about $250,000 as an angel into this startup company. And the first thing he said to us, there was 4 partners, all academics, is, okay guys, now I've invested in your company, get the hell out. Let's put some real people in that know how to run a business, right? Now mind you, we all stayed on as kind of like the science advisors, but we had 2 options at that point in time. And then I think previously in the past with the other 2 projects, I would have said, oh, get stuffed, I'm going to do this. I know everything about the science, so I know everything about business. And this is one of the common problems we all make. If we have good ideas, it doesn't mean we know how to implement the ideas. And so Brad was a really good coach, and we put a really sort of seasoned startup CEO in place, which took all of the $250,000 he gave us in the first year to get this person. This was 2000 and something, so it's kind of like $500,000 now. But we went on to get $8 million of venture capital funding, first of all from what was called the Business Development Bank of Canada, which is a federal government investment mechanism. It's kind of like the Boosting Commercialization program that the Australian government has now. I think we got about $2 million from them, and then we went on after that and got lots of other people to back this project and refine it from that sort of coffee top looking thing into that desktop thing. And starting to have sales of around $10 million a year, something in that ballpark. And then after 2 years of growing sales, it was sweet as we were purchased by a large multinational for about $100 million, which was kind of cool. So, yeah. So it can be done if you stay out of the way. Or you do what you know you're really good at. And I think that's really the lesson. And to get really good people on the science or the social innovation or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, you got to get really good people that want to work hard, and then you need really good coaching. and you need to listen to what the coaches say. And you can't do everything, so don't try to do everything. I got a few other ramblings. I got like 5 more minutes, Siobhan, before you kick me off. Is that, yeah?
10, 10.
Oh, 5:10. Good. Okay. So I want to show you something that really pleases me, but also frustrates me to hell about our world. So this is some of the projects that we did. This is a particular one in India. So we work in urban slums, and so here's an urban slum. They're actually classified as slums. There's something called the Slum Clearance Board, and the reason most people live in here, they've never done anything other than they've lived somewhere else, and the government's come along and decided, we need a new road or a new railway track, so get off your land, get out of there, and we'll give you a little piece of land. And you get a piece of land 5 meters by 5 meters, 25 square meters, in what's designated as a slum. And quite often, in this particular case, this is called Mailar Baji in Chennai. This municipal dump is right here. This is a swamp. This is low-lying swamp. And so you can just imagine it's pretty bad conditions to be put into anyway. And so this is what it looks like within the slum. There's lots of people throw lots of garbage in the ditches because there is no garbage collection. You live in a slum. There's no electricity. That's not true. There is some electricity sometimes. People steal electricity. They go up the poles and they sort of wire in, and they do things like that. And there's no connectivity into the water infrastructure system. So Chennai is now a pretty wealthy city. Has a lot of good infrastructure, water plants, but only if you're wealthy, but not if you're poor. And so this is just some more conditions in the slum. So this is actually where the slum gets its water from. This is a lake that's used for everything from industry over here, which is dumping in waste, to washing cars, to cattle grazing. And the water was being pumped, in this particular case, from the lake through the pipe, and you can see the pipe's actually broken in the sewage that sits in the ditches, so it's picking up something. This is people's houses. There's how they live, and this is what their water looks like. So they go and get, what happens is the government turns on this pump in here once a week. People run down with these bottles, they fill them up. It doesn't get treated, it's raw water, and then they take it, put it on the porch. And you can see the algae and the stuff growing in this one. And it's amazing these people are healthy, right? Or relatively healthy. They kids miss a lot of school because of diarrheal prevalence. Because this water itself, it has typically about 500,000 bacteria per 100 mils. That's the standard we measure bacteria by in public health. And our standard for drinking water is 0 bacteria per 100 mils. And I suspect the Hunter River during a flood might get up to 400 or 500 bacteria per 100 mils. So this is already an order of 10,000 times more bacteria than we even have in the raw water that we treat. And people just drink this. And so our feeling was, if you can do something about this, you could never reduce it to 0 because you don't have the money. But what can you do? So we work on these things called point-of-use water treatment systems. So what we want to do is we don't want to have a purification plant that goes into a central spout that spouts out fresh water once a week. Because why not? Well, look at these bottles. You just put it in these bottles and you take it home, and it's no good anyway. So this doesn't work like a centralized system. So we use point-of-use treatment systems. Now, what we do is we work with the women in the communities, and we get them to help us design, and we take the women in the communities in particular, because the men are bossy. They want to control everything. So we do this during the daytime. Men go off to work or go off to drink or whatever they do. And we work with the women, and we take them to the university labs. In this case, our partner was IIT in Chennai in India. And we take them into the labs, we lay out all the materials, and we say, what kind of materials do you want to use in this thing? And they have a choice of all these materials. What types of containers do you want? And we have all different types of containers and colors and shapes and sizes and stainless steel and all this kind of stuff, because it's really important to get buy-in at an early stage. And then we kind of let them pick all the stuff, but then we go away, they go back, and we kind of massage the stuff because we know that's not going to work, so we try some other stuff. But they've had a big input into particularly what they're going to see in the end. It's very simple technology. It's the old sand filtration, activated charcoal, a few other things thrown in there. Sometimes things like moringa seeds, which are really good at capturing bacteria. So there's all kinds of local material we try to use. And then we train the women how to build them and how to put them together. And the criteria for all these is always they have to cost less than $5 US to build a unit of all the materials and 50 cents a year to run. And so that's a pretty tough order to fill, but we do that. But what really is fantastic is you put this training into these women. Most of them have never been to school, let alone university or something like that. But every single project we've ever worked on, by the time we get to the point where they're manufacturing these things, they'll go, if you could find us $200, we'll build 40 of these and we'll sell them to this slum next door and we'll make some money. So they're so entrepreneurial, right? Yet here we just go, I don't know, do I want to do something? I don't know. Anyway, so, entrepreneur culture is global and we just need to think a little bit in Australia, in Canada about, let's be a little more innovative and entrepreneurial around how we build and do and offer services. One of the things I've had a passion for about 15 years is a thing called biomimicry. I had a student once who wanted to do a PhD in biomimicry, and I said, yeah, okay, knock your socks off. And from that time, I've been really interested. And biomimicry is just really copying nature. And I've got probably, 50 good examples, but I just put 2 in here today. You see these all the time off the coast of Newcastle. We see them all the time off the coast of Canada as well, humpback whales. And if you look at their fins, they've got these little ridges and striations. And so this guy worked with a biologist and they tried to model what these striations look like on an average whale, because whales are big and fat, but boy are they fast. And why are they fast? Well, part of it's because the turbulence that's generated, or the lack of turbulence that's generated off their blades. And so they're now doing these wind turbine blades, which are much more efficient. So it says they're 32% less drag. And so there's lots of great ideas out there in nature that can be used to create new business and new startups. The other one that I've picked here is some work that's going on in Africa, where they have tremendous plagues of locusts, and locusts in the millions fly around. But they've slowly studied these locusts, and with 1 million locusts in here, they never hit each other. They never touch each other. So how do they do that? What's the guidance system like, or what kind of echo sounding are they doing? And so Volvo's working on a big project looking at the physiology in these locusts, and how can you utilize that to do, to look at accident avoidance and all this kind of stuff. So there's tons of good things in nature. Mercedes has got a car that's coming out, looks like a puffer fish. So it's kind of a weird shape, but it's really aerodynamic because, puffer fish are. Anyway, I'm happy to answer questions.
That would be an idea, wouldn't it, if you could make it longer chains?
Yeah.
In a small area rather than having to go to a petrochemical plant.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any other questions?
That's just my thought.
You're also.
After the show.
You're also quiet.
A lot to think about. You cover academic, so you obviously with institutions and do all the things that manage staff, the students and all those sorts of things, and this stuff is a career in itself, but you also have to do things down all the time.
Yeah, look, I guess I would say, if people said, are you an academic? I'd say, no, I've worked in a university. Yeah. But in addition to the startups, I had a consulting company. So by the time I sold it, I had 400 people working in 20 offices globally on coastal engineering issues, because I was really keen on solving issues. And as an academic, I actually suck. We talk about things like H-index now. We measure people's H-index. How many people cite you and quote you. And in my days, in the 80s and 90s, that wasn't an issue, because you get your H-index up by having other academics quote and say how wonderful your work is. As an engineer, I always wanted my industry to want my work. So a lot of stuff I did as a researcher appears in design guidelines, for example, around the world. And so I always say to the medical researchers who say, well, I have, 20,000 citations. I say, well, I don't know, I got 1,000, but 50,000 people a day use my work. So I don't know, what do you want to have? And then, so you take it as an academic, you take whichever path you want, and neither path is wrong. You can have a fantastic pathway as a traditional academic with lots of impact. But I think because of my engineering background, it was something I always wanted to do. Yeah. But there's 24 hours in the day, so, lots of job cycles. Yeah.
What are you doing in Australia? Now you're in Canada, you've come a long way.
Oh, it's not that far. It's like 20 hours on a plane. I often go for the weekend. What am I doing here? I lived here in the 80s for about 6 years. Really enjoyed it. Went back for family reasons. And the opportunity to come to Newcastle came up 3.5, 4 years ago. I was sitting on a beach in Brazil at a conference, and I got a phone call from a recruiter saying, would you think of coming to the University of Newcastle as a DVC? I was a DVC in Canada at the time, and my initial response was, nah, I came to Newcastle in the 1980s when I lived here. It was in like an orange sky because the steelwork was billowing out, pollution. We have a city in Canada called Hamilton, which was very much the same. And they said, oh, Newcastle's changed a lot. Anyway, I was, to cut a long story short, I came here and was absolutely gobsmacked at the opportunity at the university, that the university had tons and tons of really good, talented researchers, but hadn't really thought much about how do you engage more with industry and how do you sort of drive innovation. And being a challenge-driven person, I thought, oh, this is a great challenge, because I'd done the same thing at my university in Canada. I was a DVC for 5.5 years. And we'd sort of gone from the middle of the pack to, we won Canada's Most Innovative University Award 2 years in a row, the last few years I was there. And it was really fun driving that different perspective on a university and the university's research. And so it looked like a good opportunity here. And it's actually been a fantastic opportunity because, we've really changed the way we do business in the last 3 or 4 years, including last year we were the Oz Industry Connect #1 university in the country, which is pretty good when you think we're a third of the size of most of the GO8s in terms of the number of researchers we have. It's a pretty good accomplishment. And it's a testament, I think, to the hunter and the region, and there's so much opportunity here. This is, we're going to smoke Sydney. Give us 5 years, we're going to see, I'm from an area called Waterloo in Canada, which is sort of startup capital. They have 500-600 startups a year. Waterloo's 2 hours from the capital city, Toronto, kind of like Newcastle. Waterloo's a region of 500,000 people. It's kind of like Newcastle. It has one university, and that university is fantastic. It's ranked number 120 in the world now. It's gone from 400 to 120. And it's known globally as a driver of innovation. So BlackBerry, that wonderful thing that, is way better than that piece of crap I've got, but they don't sell them anymore. But they actually, BlackBerry is now a $35 billion a year business selling the software that they designed for BlackBerry to other companies. Started in Waterloo, and the hunter reminds me so much of the opportunity that's there. So Waterloo does $30 billion a year now in startup activity and company scale-ups. That's pretty good. I think we can do that here. Can't we, Tim?
That's right.
Yeah.
Do you still work with the engineering sector at the university? Or?
No, they won't let me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, they say I'm a hack. My H-index isn't high enough. No, look, I'd absolutely love to, but I'm getting old, and 80 hours a week is my limit for work, and so I don't have time to do the engineering stuff. I'd love to, and in fact, where's Patricia's over there somewhere? We're talking about doing some stuff together in South Pacific Islands around coastal safety, coastal protection, mangroves. So I might pull off and come out of retirement to work on a couple of projects. But my job now is mostly administration. That's the role at the uni. Yeah.
If you're going to clean up mangroves, couldn't you just start at Carrington?
Yeah. Where's your project?
We are working the Google
Yeah.
So, Kuru again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. You can go overseas.
Yeah.
Kevin, with the prototypes for startup number 3,
Yeah.
did you get those developed in the university, or at some point did you go out to local engineering firms?
Yeah. Not engineering firms, a design company. Yeah. Because if it was an engineering firm, it would have looked like really bad. Because engineers are kind of like, let's create something that works. No, it doesn't matter how it looks. So there are lots of design firms, right? And in fact, we've got our creative industries group at the uni. I'm not saying there's lots of designers there, but design people think differently, and so they're industrial designers, but they're generally not from engineering background. There is lots of programs around called industrial design, which takes into all kinds of human factor issues, but also miniaturization, stuff like that. Yeah.
But then the manufacture down the track, once you got to sort of the more final version, that
Yeah.
was done where?
That was done with the company, but then shopping out to a big company that made scientific equipment. Yeah.
And after you sold that thing, was it modified even more?
Yeah, it's continually modified.
Is it a lot
Yep.
smaller now?
There's all different variants now as well. This original one was really just done for the E. coli, and it was interesting because you had to test across multiple strains of E. coli.
Yeah.
And that's not very, at the time, it wasn't very cool to bring it into a university, particularly H157. That's a PC3 lab that you need. But we worked with a lot of stuff that comes out of American science strains that they develop. And so we bought all these different strains, and then we started to work with raw strains. We started to work with raw sewage from sewage plants that had all kinds of E. coli in. But it actually, the 157 work was part of that 6 million, was very expensive because of the PC3 requirement around that. And then subsequent to that, they've actually done some work on a surrogate to look at H157 in particular. There's some work done on some kind of DNA structure of, I don't remember what it is. I forget all the science. You have to remember I'm old. So.
Talking
The point you made about Waterloo, I think it's very exciting here. We've been talking to Vicky and we're just really curious about, you get very carried away down there, like companies are suggesting we go with them or whatever, startups.
Sure.
But we have this kind of yearning to focus it in our own hometown.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about how we're really interested in all the structures in Newcastle and how we could really leverage off that to make it a Waterloo type situation.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of what I don't know what you're doing in your business, but in terms of the task you have to do to make the product or the service work or whatever it is, I mean, what kinds of skill sets do you need? Is it something you could, for instance, put a recent grad on, put a researcher on as the person who actually does the work?
Yes.
You got the ideas.
Yes.
You want somebody to implement it, and
Yes.
and you need some money for that.
Yes.
We can spend the money on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Got it.
I tell you, one of the really interesting things, and I didn't realize how skewed it was. I read a report out of the U.S. last week, I think it was, or maybe 2 weeks ago. It was around tracking angel funds and venture capital funds over a 20-year period. And where was the money spent? 10% was spent on the science or the mechanics behind the innovation to actually do it and prove it. 20% was spent on trials. 10% was spent on sort of employees. That leaves 60%. Where was 60% spent, do you think? Marketing. 60% of all venture capital funds go into marketing. And so you have to remember that. And I think we've missed this piece in Australia, and we certainly missed it 10 years ago in Canada, that you can have the best idea, you can have something that works really well, you can have the greatest business plan. If you don't have market channels, you got absolutely nothing. If you don't have a market, and so you have to build markets, and you can do that by advertising, which is kind of boring, but you can do that by acquisition, you can do that by getting a preferred market channel. And so I think finding market channels is absolutely crucial to early money, because you gotta have some early wins, but also if you want to make a big thing, it's all about market channels. Yeah.
Do you mentor? Do you mentor?
Do I mentor? Look,
No.
yeah, I look at, if you were to ask my kids, they'd say, no way, he's a friggin' lunatic. I would love to on an occasional basis, but yeah, I'm don't have a lot of time to, but yeah, I'm happy to sort of pitch in every once in a while. Look, I don't have a secret other than, I think, having good ideas is great. But really, the advice we were given about get out of the kitchen, get to people and know what they do. And so this guy who gave us the 250K was very particular. I want you to go and get so-and-so in Toronto. He's had, 4 successful startups. It just comes in to do the startup phase. So you pay the guy lots of money because, we paid him $250,000 for the year. He was doing a couple of others at the same time. He takes also share in a company. And you need somebody that's had that track record in success. And I think they're hard to find, We have a lot of well-meaning people who want to be mentors, who have made lots of money. But there's a difference between making money because you've been in the right place at the right time and actually having a startup. And so there's a lot of wealth created, for example, in the resource sector, both in Canada and in Australia. But that doesn't mean you've actually had knowledge on how to create a viable business like a startup. It might mean you knew how to run a business and how to make profit, control your expenses and generate revenue, but that's not the same as getting something going from the start where there is no market or you've got to build market. So, yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about that experience when you got that angel investor on and how the company sort of restructured itself and all the people that were running it ended up working inside it?
Yeah, so what happened, it was just a bunch of profs with an idea that we can solve the world's problems, and, what do you mean we need a CEO that knows about business? We're smart, we're academics. The average academic's way smarter than everybody else, of course, as you know. Right? At least we think we do. And so the 250K is not a lot of money when the guy that you're going to hire from Toronto says, I'm going to charge you 250K and take 10% of your company. And so what happened was he then sort of went on and got a bit more money and put in marketing person. One of the four of us became the chief science officer for the company, because you do have to have credibility when you go to pitch for more and more money. And then just as there was more and more money coming in the door after 2 rounds of angel funding of 250 and then maybe 500,000, then we got the 2.8 million from Business Development Bank of Canada by pitching the concept. And Canada was like Australia is now. It was ripe for investment into startups. And so there's lots of good programs around now. And I would say, again, Canada, in that time, 2000, was about where we are here in Australia. The venture capital funding wasn't overly abundant, but it was just starting to grow and people were interested. And what's really cool about technologies like this, it's way better than the drug business, right? The drug business, you stick your money in and you wait for 20 years and the roulette wheel goes around, and if it lands on 7 black, you make money. If it doesn't, everybody loses everything. So that's a very high risk. And what's happened in Waterloo, and I think this will happen in other markets here, maybe hopefully for Newcastle. All the money in Toronto is the banking capital of Canada. It's got more millionaires per square inch than anywhere else in Canada, partially anywhere else in the world. They're all investing their money in medical technologies, medical and pharma, because Toronto is the big pharma capital in North America. And they started to migrate out to Waterloo, where there was short wins available. So you could take a startup that had 2 years under its belt and had grown its business to 10 people. You could buy it or you could invest in it, and it could make a lot of money. Like BlackBerry did. BlackBerry went from 2 Waterloo graduates to 700 employees in 2 years, because they had a good idea and they had good backing. And slowly the money has migrated from Toronto to Waterloo. So there's about $1 billion venture capital fund for the Waterloo region now. I think we can do that in the Hunter. We need to get people in Sydney enthused about some of the stuff we're doing here that's not pharma, that's not sort of long-term projects. And it sounds like you guys have one. Yeah. In the financial sector. Yeah.
Within the government. Finance and innovation.
Yeah. There's lots of money for fintech. Have you met Tim? Is he giving you lots of money?
Who's next?
In the innovation space,
Yeah.
it's really collaborative and terrific and generous,
Yeah.
which is new. Usually you take a business idea in a secretive way, but there seems to be a lot more generosity in that space.
While you're developing, yeah. But once you have a product or a service and you got competitors, then it's no longer a friendly game. Yeah. But I think what you'll find is no matter where you go in the world, people who have had a lot of success in making money quickly, so from startups that go really big quick, they're all willing to put time back in. Like this Interact guy, he didn't have to hang out with a bunch of professors. Now, I just actually looked online today to see how he's doing, and he's now got like 10 companies he's got shares in that are all $100 million companies. So he's taken his $400 million. He's lived the life of Riley on a beautiful lakefront home in Kingston. It's worth $10 million, and he's also then made another $300-400 million. So that's pretty cool.
We might wrap up there.
Tape's about to run out. We're done. We'll go offline.